The year is 2040. The room is large. The air is conditioned. It is the keynote address at the Global Arid Lands Symposium. A young woman stands at the podium. Her name is Dr. Ana Reyes. She is presenting her doctoral thesis. The title is projected behind her. The Vance Protocol: Generative Hydrology in Post-Industrial Agriculture. In the front row, a man shifts in his seat. His name is Ben Carter. He is a senior partner at Blackwood Capital. He is on the symposium's board of directors. He looks at the name on the screen. Vance. He feels something he can't quite name, a cold echo from a long time ago. Dr. Reyes clicks to the next slide. It's a satellite image, a patchwork of brown and dusty green. One small rectangle of deep, vibrant emerald stands out, a place of impossible life. The presenter points to it with a laser. The protocol's efficacy, she says, is not theoretical. It has been proven over 16 years, proven on a single 160-acre parcel. A parcel once deemed topographically challenged. A parcel once labeled unsuitable for commercial agriculture. A parcel once passed over for acquisition. Ben Carter stops listening. He is looking at the date on the slide. Assessment completed, June 12, 2024. He remembers that day. He remembers a porch swing. He remembers the taste of iced tea. He remembers a woman with hands like river stones. He remembers his own voice, kind, patient, certain. He remembers telling her she couldn't. He remembers believing he was helping her. Dr. Reyes continues. She speaks of senior water rights, of gravity-fed acequias, of a system so old it was forgotten by modern surveyors, a system that regenerated an entire watershed, a system that made one small ranch the most productive parcel of land in the entire state. The room is silent. Ben Carter looks down at his hands. They are soft. They have signed papers worth billions. They have never touched the dirt. He thinks of her hands, and the gap between who she became and who he told her she would be felt as wide and as deep as the river itself. This channel tells the stories of people who were told no, people who were written off, people who looked at certainty in the eye and chose to build something else. These are the stories nobody else is telling, the stories of quiet work, of decades of proof. If you believe these stories matter, subscribe to this channel, because the next story is waiting, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Let's go back to June 12, 2024. Ilara Vance sat on her porch swing. The chain made a soft, rhythmic sound. Squeak, release. Squeak, release. It was the sound of her childhood, the sound of her father sitting here after a long day, the sound of her husband John watching the sunset. Now it was just her. And the young man in the crisp blue shirt, Ben Carter. He had a kind face. He had a gentle way of speaking. He held a leather-bound tablet. He had been talking for 20 minutes about progress, about the future, about the Blackwood Capital Ecological Preserve. He had a map on the screen. It showed the whole river valley, dozens of ranches, all shaded in green, all owned by Blackwood Capital. All except one, a small 160-acre rectangle, hers. He slid the tablet across the porch table. Our final offer, Mrs. Vance. It was a good number. More money than she had ever seen. More money than John had ever seen. Enough to move to town. Enough to be comfortable. Enough to never worry again. Ilara didn't look at the number. She looked at the river. She looked at the cottonwoods her grandfather had planted. She looked at the barn John had built with his own 2 hands. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Carter, but my answer is the same. The land is not for sale." Ben Carter sighed. It was a patient sound, a sound of practiced understanding. "Mrs. Vance," he said. "Ilara, may I be frank with you?" She nodded. He swiped the screen. Charts appeared. Soil composition reports, water table projections, 5-year commodity forecasts. He spoke softly. "Your soil is high in clay content. It's difficult to work. Your water rights are senior, yes, but your delivery system is inefficient. You lose nearly 40% to evaporation. You're farming a heritage breed of cattle. They're not commercially viable at scale." He leaned forward. His voice dropped lower. "We've bought every other ranch on this river. The co-op in town will be closing next year. The grain elevator is being decommissioned. The large animal vet is retiring. Everything you depend on to run this place will be gone." He paused. He let the silence do the work. This wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with kindness. Ilara just watched him. Her hands were resting in her lap. They were not soft hands. They were maps of a life lived. "Mr. Carter," she said, "my family has been on this land for 120 years. We've seen droughts. We've seen floods. We've seen good prices and bad. We're still here." He nodded. "I respect that. I truly do. But this is different. This isn't a drought. It's a paradigm shift. The world has changed. The economics of a ranch this size are no longer sustainable." He looked her directly in the eye. "My job is to analyze risk, and staying here alone is the biggest risk you can take. I am not going to be the man who stands by and watches you lose everything. This is the most dangerous limitation, the one imposed by someone who genuinely believes they are protecting you. Certainty about another person's capabilities, delivered with kindness. It is more damaging than outright hostility, because it cannot be fought with anger. It can only be disproven. Disproven with decades of work." Ilara stood up. The swing fell silent. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Carter. I'll be fine." She walked to the edge of the porch. She pointed to a small, barely visible line of stones running along the hillside. "Do you know what that is?" He squinted. "Looks like an old property wall, or an erosion line." "That," she said, "is an acequia. My great-grandfather built it." He looked at his tablet. "There's no record of a canal on this parcel. The county maps show nothing. The geological surveys show nothing." Ilara smiled, a small, sad smile. "It's not on your maps, Mr. Carter, but it's here." He looked from the tablet to the faint line of stones. He saw nothing but rocks and dirt. He saw an old woman clinging to the past. He felt a pang of pity. He stood and offered his hand. "The offer stands for 30 days, Mrs. Vance. Please, think about it." She did not take his hand. "I have," she said. He left. The dust from his electric vehicle hung in the air for a long time. Ilara stood on the porch until it was gone. She went inside. She went to the roll-top desk in the study. She pulled out a framed photograph of her husband, John. He was young, smiling, leaning on a fence post. She remembered the day the bankers came, 30 years before, telling them to sell, telling them their methods were old, telling them they couldn't make it. John had listened politely. He had thanked them for their time. After they left, he had turned to her. He had taken her hands in his. "They can measure the dirt, Ilara," he had said. They can measure the rain, but they can't measure the knowing. The knowing is enough. She touched the glass over his face. The knowing is enough, she whispered. Then she went to the barn and she got to work. That first year was about remembering. It was not about planting. It was not about profit. It was about water. She had an old map, drawn by her great-grandfather on canvas. The lines were faded. The ink was brown with age. It showed the main acequia, the acequia madre, and a network of smaller channels, veins of life across the land. It was a gravity-fed system, ingenious in its simplicity. It started high up the canyon, at a spring the surveyors had missed. It wasn't a big spring, just a steady, reliable seep from the rock. But over a day, it was thousands of gallons. The system diverted that water. It guided it along the contours of the land, using stone sluice gates and earthen dams. It was a slow system, a patient system. It didn't flood the land. It let the water sink deep into the soil, recharging the ground itself. But the system was broken. Decades of neglect had ruined it. Channels were filled with silt. Gates were broken. Dams had washed away. So she started, one stone at a time. She walked the entire length of the main channel, 5 miles, uphill. She carried a shovel and a pickaxe. She was 72 years old. Her neighbors saw her, the ones who had sold out. They drove by in their new trucks. They saw her clearing brush. They saw her hauling rocks in a wheelbarrow. They shook their heads. Poor Ilara, too stubborn for her own good. She heard them. She didn't listen. She listened to the memory of her husband's voice. The knowing is enough. The knowing was hard work. The knowing was sore muscles. The knowing was sunup to sundown. She had to relearn the old ways, how to read the slope of the land, how to place a stone just right so the water would flow, not fight. She found the old tools in the back of the barn, covered in dust, a stone hammer, a grating level made of wood and glass, her great-grandfather's tools. They felt right in her hands. They felt like they belonged there. The young men from Blackwood Capital would drive by, in their clean white trucks, on their way to the construction site, where they were building their own water system. A system of deep wells and powerful pumps and miles of plastic pipe. A system that cost millions of dollars. They saw her, a small woman in a big hat, moving rocks. They probably thought she was building a garden wall. They never stopped. They never asked. They had their maps. They had their data. They were certain. One day, an old friend stopped, a rancher named Luis. His family had been the first to sell. He felt guilty about it. He pulled his truck over. "Ilara, what are you doing?" She didn't stop working. "I'm fixing the ditch, Luis." He looked at the long, dry channel. "This thing hasn't held water since my grandfather was a boy." "It will," she said. He watched her for a while. He saw the blisters on her hands. He saw the determination in her eyes. He went to the back of his truck. He pulled out a heavy pry bar. He walked over to a large boulder blocking the channel. He didn't say a word. He just jammed the bar underneath and started to heave. She worked beside him. They didn't talk. They just worked. The sound of steel on rock. The sound of two people refusing to let something die. When the sun started to set, the boulder was gone. Luis wiped his brow. "My grandpa used to say this ditch was smarter than any engineer. He said it knew the land's secrets." Ilara nodded. "It does." He got back in his truck. "You need help again, you call me. Don't be proud." She watched him drive away. She was not proud. She was busy. It took her 6 months, 6 months of back-breaking labor to clear the main channel, to rebuild the gates, to repair the dams. Then came the day. She walked the 5 miles back up the canyon, to the spring, to the main diversion gate her great-grandfather had built. It was made of a single, massive slab of slate, held in place by a simple wooden lever. She put her hands on the wood. It was worn smooth by time. She took a deep breath, and she pushed. The lever groaned. The stone gate shifted, and for the first time in 80 years, the water turned. It flowed into the Acequia Madre. It was just a trickle at first, a silver thread against the dark earth. She followed it, walking along the bank she had just rebuilt. The water moved slowly, patiently. It filled the dry cracks in the soil. It soaked into the thirsty ground. It whispered its way down the canyon. By the time she got back to her house, the sun was setting. A tiny stream of water was flowing past her barn. Clear, cold, alive. She knelt down. She cupped her hands and drank. It was the sweetest water she had ever tasted. It tasted like memory. It tasted like defiance. It tasted like knowing. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who thought they were protecting you. Someone who laid out all the logical reasons for your failure. Someone whose kindness felt like a cage. What did you do? Did you believe them? Or did you go to the barn, pick up the old tools, and get to work? Let me know in the comments below, because this is where the story becomes bigger than one woman and one ranch. This is where the knowing begins to challenge the data. The community watched. The ones who had sold, they watched with pity. Or maybe something else. Something that looked a lot like regret. They had money in the bank. They had new houses in town. But they drove by the old places. They saw the bulldozers from Blackwood Capital. They saw the old barns being torn down, the old fences being ripped out. And they saw Ilara. Her fields were starting to turn green. A deep, rich green. Not the pale green of spray irrigation, but the green of soil that is truly alive. The doubters were there too. At the feed store, at the post office. "She's crazy," they'd say. "That whole valley is going to be a golf course and condos. What's she going to do with a few acres of green? She can't stop progress." One of them said it to her face. An old neighbor, a man she'd known her whole life. "You're being selfish, Ilara. You're holding up the future for a piece of worthless dirt." She didn't argue. She just looked at him. "It's not worthless to me, Tom. The dirt is enough." Her supporters were quieter. They didn't talk much. They acted. Luis showed up one day with an old seed drill, the kind that didn't need a tractor. "My father's," he said. "Thought you could use it." Another neighbor dropped off a dozen heirloom fruit trees. "These grew here before the big farms came. They don't need much water. They just need the knowing." She started planting, not the commodity crops the markets wanted. She planted what the land wanted. Drought-resistant grains, native grasses for her small herd, deep-rooted vegetables, things that worked with the slow water from the acequia, not against it. She was creating an ecosystem, not just a farm. The birds came back first, then the pollinators. The soil began to change, from hard clay to rich, dark loam. She was the quiet witness to a resurrection, and from a distance, another witness watched. Ben Carter. He didn't drive out there anymore, but he saw the satellite reports. Every month a new one would cross his desk. Thermal imaging, vegetation density index. His analysts were confused. They kept flagging her parcel as an anomaly. A data error. The heat signature was too low. The biomass reading was too high. It didn't make sense. A 160-acre parcel with no industrial irrigation, surrounded by a multi-billion-dollar construction project, should have been brown and dying. Instead, it was the greenest spot in the entire valley. He told them to ignore it. A rounding error, he said. Focus on the project. But he kept the reports. He put them in a private folder on his computer. He looked at them when no one was around. He saw that small, defiant rectangle of green, and he felt that old, familiar feeling. Certainty. But this time, it was cracking. Let me tell you about the next 15 years. They can be measured in numbers, and they can be measured in knowing. 2025. Blackwood Capital breaks ground. The project is massive. A luxury hotel, 2 golf courses, 500 exclusive villas. Their wells are drilled, 1,000 feet deep into the aquifer. Ilara Vance plants her first commercial crop, a heritage wheat. It yields 30 bushels per acre. She sells it to a small artisanal bakery in the city. Cash. 2027. The Blackwood Preserve opens its first phase. The grand opening is covered in glossy magazines. They talk of sustainable luxury. They talk of harmony with nature. Their water pumps run 24 hours a day. Ilara Vance buys her neighbor's old tractor, a 1978 John Deere. She pays for it with money she earned. Cash. 2030. The first drought hits. Not a bad one, just a dry year. The river level drops. Blackwood Capital has to start rationing water on its golf courses. The greens turn a little brown at the edges. Ilara's acequia keeps flowing. The spring is deep. It doesn't care about one dry year. Her fields stay green. The knowing is enough. 2032. Blackwood Capital reports its first quarter loss. Membership sales are down. Water costs are up. They have to reseed their fairways with a more drought-tolerant grass. It costs them $3 million. Ilara Vance buys another 80 acres. An abandoned parcel upstream from her. It has a collapsed acequia on it. She pays for it with money she earned. Cash. 2035. The big drought begins. The one the climate models predicted. The river becomes a trickle. The state imposes mandatory water cuts. Blackwood's wells are pumping sand. Their junior water rights mean they are the first to be cut off. The sustainable luxury resort starts trucking in water at a cost of $50,000 a day. The golf courses are closed. The villas have empty swimming pools. The harmony with nature is looking very disharmonious. Ilara's acequia flows. It is lower than before, but it flows. Her senior water rights are absolute. They predate the state. They are tied to the land, tied to the ditch, tied to the knowing. Her ranch is an oasis in a desert. Her heritage cattle are fat and healthy. Her fruit trees are heavy with fruit. The artisanal bakery now buys her entire wheat crop and asks for more. The contrast math was simple. Blackwood Capital had spent $2.2 billion to create a fragile, artificial ecosystem that was now dying. Ilara Vance had spent 1 year of hard labor and the wisdom of her great-grandfather to restore a living system that was now thriving. The numbers on a spreadsheet tell one story. The water in a ditch tells another. The year is 2039. The phone rings in Alara's kitchen. She doesn't answer it much anymore, but this time, she does. The voice on the other end is familiar, older, more tired, but she knows it. "Mrs. Vance? This is Ben Carter." There is a long silence. "I remember you, Mr. Carter." He clears his throat. "I was wondering if I could come see you. It's important." She looks out the window, at her green fields, at the brown, dusty hills of the Blackwood Preserve beyond. "The porch swing is still there," she says. "I'll be there tomorrow." He arrives in a modest electric car, not the fancy one from before. He wears a simple gray suit. He looks older than his years. He walks up the steps to the porch. She is sitting there, on the swing. She has a glass of iced tea waiting for him. He sits down. He doesn't know where to begin. He looks at her ranch. It's not just a ranch anymore. It's a sanctuary. The air feels cooler here. The ground feels softer. "It looks," he says, his voice quiet. "It looks beautiful." She nods. The land is happy. He finally looks at her. "We were wrong." He says it so softly, she almost doesn't hear it. "I was wrong. My models were wrong. My data was wrong. We measured everything: soil density, aquifer levels, market projections. We measured everything except what mattered." Alara says nothing. She just waits. The silence is not angry. It is not triumphant. It is just silence. A space for the truth to settle. "Our wells are dry," he says. "The resort is facing bankruptcy. We need water. I've studied the county records, your water rights, the ones tied to that acequia. They are the oldest in the state. And they are the only ones left." He leans forward, the same way he did 15 years ago. But this time, the certainty is gone, replaced by desperation. "We want to buy your water, Alara. Not the land, just the water. We will pay you anything you ask." She stands up. She walks into the house. He thinks she has left him. She comes back with a book, a simple cloth-bound ledger. She places it on the table between them. She opens it. The pages are filled with neat, careful handwriting. Dates, yields, expenses, profits. 15 years of meticulous records. 15 years of a ranch that was supposed to be unsustainable. She slides the book across to him. He looks at the final page, at the net profit. The number is staggering, more than his resort had made in its best year. She points to a line item under expenses. Water, $0. He closes the book. He understands. This isn't about money. This is about proving something. Proving wrong the man who thought he was being kind. It is the loneliest fight there is. Alara finally speaks. Her voice is not hard. It is just clear, like the water in her ditch. "You measured the land, Mr. Carter. You measured the soil. But you never measured the water." She pauses. "And you never measured the knowing." He looks down at his soft hands, then at her hands, which still look like river stones. He feels the full weight of his mistake. It wasn't a financial error. It was an error of imagination, an error of respect. "What do you want?" he asks. His voice is a whisper. "What is your price?" She looks out at the land, at the legacy of her family. "The water is not for sale," she says, "but it can be shared, under my terms." Her terms were not about money. They were about legacy. The water would not be sold, it would be leased, and the price was steep. First, Blackwood Capital would establish a trust, the Vance Trust for Regenerative Agriculture, funded with $10 million, to provide grants and education for young farmers, to teach them the old ways, the ways of the knowing. Second, the Blackwood Preserve would be transformed. The golf courses would be ripped out, replanted with native grasses. The villas would be retrofitted with rainwater capture systems. The resort would become a center for ecological study, a partner to the trust. Third, every summer, 10 students from the local agricultural college would live and work on her ranch. Their tuition would be paid by Blackwood Capital. They would learn how to read the land, how to work with water, not command it. They would learn the Vance Protocol, not from a textbook, but with their hands in the dirt. Ben Carter agreed to every term. He had no choice. It was that or ruin. But it was more than that. He saw it for what it was, a chance for redemption, a way to undo the damage of his own certainty. The story of Alara Vance became a quiet legend. She never gave interviews. She never wrote a book. She just kept working the land, teaching the students. But the ripples of her quiet decision spread out. The Vance Protocol was studied, replicated, adopted by farmers in other arid regions. The young woman at the symposium, Dr. Ana Reyes, she was one of the first students in that summer program. She learned everything she knew at Alara's kitchen table. The legacy was not in the money or the fame. The legacy was in the knowing, passed from one generation to the next, the truest measure of success. Not what you build for yourself, but what you build for others, what outlasts you. Today, if you visit that valley, you will see something remarkable. You will see the Blackwood Center for Ecological Study, and next to it, the Vance Conservancy. Two places, once in opposition, now linked. One born of data, the other born of knowing. In the main hall of the Conservancy, in a glass case, is an old piece of canvas, the hand-drawn map of the Acequia system. The ink is faded, the edges are frayed, but the lines are still clear. A roadmap to a different kind of future. Sometimes, an old woman comes and stands before the map. Her hands are gnarled now, but her eyes are clear. Young students, their faces full of hope, will see her there. They don't know who she is. They just see an old woman looking at an old map. But she isn't looking at the map. She is listening. Listening to the whisper of slow water, listening to the voice of her husband. The knowing is enough. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is being told they can't. Someone is sitting on a porch, looking at a chart, listening to a kind voice explain all the reasons why they will fail. That person is being measured. Their resources are being calculated. Their past is being weighed against their future. And a conclusion is being drawn for them by someone who is certain. The story of Alara Vance is a reminder that the most important assets are never on the balance sheet. Resilience is not on the balance sheet. Courage is not on the balance sheet. Generational knowledge, the knowing, is not on the balance sheet. They can't measure it, so they ignore it. They write it off as a rounding error. This story is for anyone who has ever been made to feel like a rounding error. Your work is not to argue with them. Your work is not to convince them. Your work is to go to the barn, find the old tools, and prove them wrong. Not with words, but with decades of quiet work, with a harvest they never thought was possible. If this story means something to you, subscribe to this channel. Comment below with a time you chose the knowing over the data. And share this story with one person who needs to be reminded that they are not a rounding error. Share it with someone who needs to hear, just once, that the knowing is enough.